dumbest thing you've ever heard someone say with absolute confidence. Story 1. My cousin has said some belters over the years. Quickly, he thought Australia, where in England, is at least 2 days in front of us. So thought he could travel, watch the cricket, and call home to tell us the results. And bet without losing took nearly an hour to explain his errors and the 24-hour clock. When NASA said they had found signs of water on Mars, he literally thought it was actual signs saying water this way. It would be fun to see how close you could get to the ground before pulling the cord on a parachute. Would someone have the bottle to pull it 10 feet from the ground because he thought when you pull the cord, you spring back up? Not that the cameraman is still falling. The moon landings are fake. He's been to Cape Canaveral and also has the Saturn V Lego. I think he's starting to believe the flat Earth BS too. His mates convinced him camels laid eggs. Years later, when some of us found out on Xbox chat, he denied it, said it was all lies, etc. Then later said, anyway, it wasn't camels, it was donkeys. Story 2. My cousin has given me a couple good ones. I was drinking out a slanted wine glass. You know where the rim is slanted? I want to take a drink, and she bolted out of her chair at me telling me to stop because she thought I was going to spill wine on myself. She also said that reindeer have antennae. She deadass looked at my brother and told him he should put an air conditioner on his motorcycle. She said she doesn't like wearing socks because she can't feel the floor. She once said that she wants to marry a man that has the same last name as her first name, but with an O. For example, Riley O'Reilly, Jenny O'Jenny, etc. She was at the store and bought a kiwi when she meant to get a grapefruit. I guess she said the signs were really close together or something, and she had never had a grapefruit. She was buying one to try it. When she was checking out, the checker scanned it, and it showed up as kiwi. She asked why it says kiwi when it's a grapefruit. I really would have loved to see the look on the checker's face. El Mayo. That's all I can remember. She's a barrel of laughs, that one. Story 3. One of the reasons I left teaching is I was working with a student after school for an extra math session. He told me that half of 50 is 0. I thought I had misheard him, so I asked him to repeat it, and he said half of 50 is 0 right. I corrected him and moved on. Later, in the teacher's lounge, another math teacher told me I know exactly what he did. He split the number in half vertically. Half of 50 is 5, and the other half is 0. That was when I knew I had to leave teaching for a while. There was no way I was able to think like that, and I felt like I could not help my students anymore. Story 4. I had a teacher once tell me that Blackbeard the pirate was an imaginary figure. A huge history nerd at the time told them he was real, and his name was Edward Teach. They said, yeah, in the stories that is his name. Story 5. As kids, my sister pointed out that she could see the moon. It was sunny in daytime. My stepdad says, it's not the moon, you can't see that during the day, and my mom goes with so much matter-of-fact confidence, when the sun goes down, the moon comes up. My sister and I looked at each other in disbelief. Then back at the moon, we could clearly see and just shook our heads. Story 6. So, it must have been that if you can smell it after it passes through underwear and jeans, then an N95 mask can do absolutely nothing against COVID. Had to explain that it is gas and has much smaller molecular size than a COVID virus. That the virus is spread through water droplets, which are much, much bigger than gas molecules. Underwear and jeans are nowhere near as tightly knit as the masks. And the masks are designed to have almost microscopic fibers hanging out in all which ways that will wick up any water particles that touch them. I love the uneducated. Story 7. That Sasquatch can shrink or grow their size at will. They can teleport interdimensional. That they can psychically interfere with electronic devices. And that they are used by the U.S. government to fight dogmen, which I was told are not werewolves, they're dogmen, with complete conviction. Story 8. In my 10th grade U.S. history class, we were talking about the space race. One kid kept insisting the moon landing was fake because you can see in the video they have shadows and there are no light bulbs on the moon. We all thought he was joking at first, but no, he was not. Story 9. This was from a woman at the park my kids always played at. We weren't friends, but for a time we, along with a bunch of other women, were at the park together at the same time. But the gist was the women thought this is mostly, in her own words, one. Medicine doctors like from long ago had the job of giving women jobs after having babies too. This was needed to be done since stopped working after you were done breastfeeding. This working had nothing to do with the ability to breastfeed. No, she could explain in what way stopped working. This was just a given. She didn't know any women who had kids and didn't get a job after to make sure they worked. Yes, this woman had kids. Her little one was 2 or so, and she was asking people at the park with older kids where they got their jobs. And as a side note, this woman looked like she had lived a hard life. Story 10. Pasteurized milk is from cows that are let out to a pasture. In week, I couldn't correct them because I was so shocked. I think I said something like, are you sure? Story 11. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Felon 47. Story 12, a guy from work told me a woman that women can't feel it when they have kidney stones because the stones just fall out since they can push out babies through the same hole. My own father told me, a mother of three, that my mom didn't need surgery when they tied her tubes because when a woman has a baby, her organs come out with the baby and the doctors ties the tubes and then puts them back up there. Story 13, an ex-friend was very dumb and arrogant, snapped his fingers at a waiter and said, "Look at this dish. I ordered a beefsteak tomato salad. Do you see any beef or steak?" Story 14, why would I pay employees when I'm not making money yet? Dude I knew who was trying to start his own business and expected people to work for free until he was making money. Story 15, Alaska is positioned slightly southwest of California because of how the inset maps often position it. Rather than, oh, maybe I read the map wrong, they were adamant that this was the case. Story 16, during the height of COVID, there was a guy at the gym loudly proclaiming that the vaccine was just some kind of plot by the state to somehow gain mind control over people. I couldn't believe I was hearing it for real. Story 17, my father said business monopolies are a good thing because it encourages small businesses to open and offer more affordable pricing for consumers. My father is a very successful business owner who should know better than that. Story 18, back in 1992, I was talking about how I wanted to see Bram Stoker's Dracula when it was in theaters. A girlfriend of my buddy's pipes up and says, "Bram Stoker and Francis Ford Coppola haven't put out a bad movie yet." I immediately responded with, "That's because Bram Stoker has been dead for like 80 years. Story 19, both racist and dumb, but had a high school history teacher coach say that black people lived on the east side of town because it was closer to Africa and that they were faster runners than white people because they do not have to touch the ground every step but kind of can levitate every other step when running fast. This was in the 80s. Story 20, he refused a raise because it would put him in a higher tax bracket, therefore have to pay more in taxes, which meant he would actually be making less than before the raise. Story 21, my brother-in-law be like, we, the consumer, are not going to pay for the tariffs. Why would prices go up? And science needs to be 100 all the time. Why are they always chaining? Are they dumb? Do they not know how vaccines work? Story 22, I was at my very racist grandfather's house one night a few years before he died. Either how it came up or what in particular we were talking about. But we were on the subject of Egypt. I must have mentioned something about Egypt being in Africa because my grandfather laughed and very condescendingly told me Egypt is not in Africa. I don't remember where he thought it was, probably the Middle East, but I told him Egypt is definitely in northeastern Africa. He eventually told me to go get his globe. He was rich with very old-timey decor. I got the globe and immediately pointed Egypt out to him. He then said the globe was wrong. Story 23, men are born to be naturally better pilots. That's why I would never fly with a female pilot. My Andrew Tate superfan brother. Anyways, no, aircrafts are a man-made device, and therefore are not naturally sourced. There's not a single cell in the male anatomy that supports aerodynamics. Story 24, funny you should ask. My husband just went on a long rant about family stuff, and he keeps saying that what his grandmother has is called old-timer's disease. To be fair, I used to think that's what it's called when I was 5. Story 25, that men don't lose control of their emotions like women do. Said directly after a bar brawl where a bunch of men threw hysterical hissy fits because someone played music they didn't like on the jukebox. Story 26, the Mormon Church is true. I said it with pure confidence. Every member of my family said it with pure confidence. All my friends and neighbors growing up said it with pure confidence. Turns out we were all dumb. XD. Story 27, my friend drank so much he started combusting. No, the guy did not actually catch on fire due to his high alcohol content. He drank so much he started convulsing, not combusting, and he had to be taken to ER. Story 28, I sometimes think back to philosophy class in school. 2 particular statements still haunt me to this day. One was on the ethics of eating animals. A classmate said that she used to live near a pig farm and had a look inside. She saw the miserable and cruel conditions the animals were living in. She concluded that the animals are better off dead than living like that. However, once they are dead, there's really no harm in eating them since they're dead. The other was about foreign aid, whether or not rich countries have an obligation to help poorer countries. Another classmate said that we shouldn't help African countries because those are often governed by bad people. And those bad people are obviously supported by the populace because if they were unhappy with their leaders, they could simply do a revolution and replace the government with a better one. Story 29, my teacher argued passionately with me, who had at the time become obsessed with the Sherlock Holmes stories, that Sherlock Holmes was not only a real person, but the founder of Scotland Yard. She argued to the point of giving me detention and phoning my dad who sparked my interest in Sherlock Holmes. My dad was furious. She eventually relented that he was based off a real person. Story 30, my mom was baffled When I told her vegetarians don't eat fish or chicken, she tried to tell me I was wrong for like a minute, but I'm like, no, Mom, vegetarians are like herbivores, no meat. Story 31, the guy that owned the boat that I worked on bought a telescope to look at the stars from the boat. When he looked through the telescope, he inevitably realized there was too much sway on the boat to focus on anything so far away. That's when he said, let's bring it to the top deck. That way, it's closer and will be clearer, with 100 confidence. Couldn't fathom the lack of brain cells. Story 32, women shouldn't be in positions of authority. The earth is flat. There is scientific evidence. These were both statements from the same man on our first date. Needless to say, that was our last date. Story 33, somewhat friends stated over dinner in October, the following: everyone, even Hitler and Ted Bundy, has added the same amount of good as bad to the world. It's a scientific fact. Based on the laws of energy, I started to ask about PDFS cartel leaders, evil billionaires, slave owners, etc., and got the same answer. I have an advanced degree in math and studied the actual laws of energy as part of my electives in multiple science-oriented courses. She has a BA in English, doubled down after getting mad. Not knocking any education, as some of the most intelligent people don't have the luxury of getting pieces of paper with your name on it. But when you excuse murder, genocide, and the whole 9 yards, maybe have strong reasoning for your stance, I cut her out the moment that dinner ended. Story 34, cancer has already been cured. They just don't want to let anyone know because it's more lucrative to treat cancer patients than to cure them. Told to me with absolute certainty by 2 people in a conversation with me. Story 35, tell this story a lot. When I worked at a pub restaurant, I'd been off a few days with a nasty flu. The usual ribbing and mistaking from the chefs when I returned, until one chef proudly announced, not taking the "at all, you can't have been that ill. I had the same thing, and I wasn't that bad." You could hear a pin drop until the head chef said, a few seconds later, "You're a moron," and went to do his stock take. Story 36, 2 education majors who were arguing the world started at the time, 2013 years ago, because nothing exists before zero. Future teachers, currently teachers. Story 37, a girl that I worked with was convinced the baby she was carrying wasn't hers because her partner cheated on her, and the baby is really the affair partner's because it's a boy and she wanted a girl. So when she gave birth, she got a maternity test to make sure baby is hers. Newsflash, it was hers. We tried to explain it can't work like that, but she wouldn't believe it, so in the end we catered to her stupid belief. It was very amusing. Story 38, I lived in a communal house for years, and one of my housemates was dumb as a rock. One day, he told me that he had read online that NASA had discovered a new zodiac sign. Now, I know astronomy from astrology, but didn't want to be pedantic, so I played along. The conversation just kept getting weirder and weirder, and I didn't know what to say anymore when he asked me how that would work out for our horoscopes, as we would now have to divide the year into 13 parts, and that he perhaps would have to change zodiac, and that could completely change his life. 35 years old. Just WTF, dude. Please stop thinking. Story 39, that one testicle made fighter and the other made fertilizing. The fighter somehow went first, fighting what I do not know, and then the fertilizing ones came after. Story 40, a schoolmate of mine got into a yelling match with me. She claimed she wasn't an animal. Our back and forth was mostly yes, you're, no, I'm not. But I remember breaking through her nonsense when I asked her if she was a plant. To be fair, it was middle school. Story 41, at the Wright-Patterson Air Museum, I overheard someone saying to a friend while standing in front of a stealth bomber, "I thought you couldn't see these planes." Story 42, the government controls the weather specifically to target lower-class white families and prevent them from upward momentum economically. Guy was 100 dead serious and was convinced I knew all this like it was taught in first grade. Story 43, I've heard people say stupid things like, when I was a child, there was no such thing as autism or mental health issues. If anyone started that nonsense, the teachers would make sure it was beaten out of them, and they wonder why so many adults have issues now. Story 44, while discussing politics, I pointed to someone that they had bad information about some fact. They got angry and claimed they had a right to be misinformed, to choose to be disinformed. LOL. Story 45, Junior. High geography teacher said there wasn't dry places in the world at elevations below sea level. Geography teacher, same JR. Hi. The health teacher preached homeopathy as part of the class. Story 46, that the deer scat that I had seen come out of black-tailed deers an hour previously was not, in fact, deer scat. It had to be something else, and he knew better because he had gone hunting before when he was a kid. Never mind that this was across the country and an entirely different species of deer. Never mind that I grew up in the area, was quite familiar with our local wildlife. and knew how to ID black-tailed deer since I learned in Girl Scouts. Never mind that I had actually observed that very pile of deer scat as it emerged from the end of a yearling doe who was in fact a deer taking in my yard, not 10 feet away from the window, in which I was quietly observing her as she and her button-buck sibling cased my house. Nope, couldn't be deer scat. I didn't know what I was talking about. He doubled down, too, tripled down. In fact, one of the lesser reasons he is now an ex-husband, I was staying at a place in Bali once where there was this obnoxious wannabe wellness guru. He was the kind of person who liked to pat himself on the back about how wonderfully spiritual he was while expecting others to feed his ego. He never really spoke to me. I guess that he took one look at me and decided that my aura was too mauve or something, but he had no volume control, so I'd always hear him sharing his nonsense. He once told this couple staying there, in a tone of voice as though it was the deepest thing that anyone had ever said, time is an emotion. But the best thing he said that I overheard was, so there was this guy I met, and he could cure cancer with the power of his mind. With the power of his mind. Can you believe that? It's true, I saw it. He cured this guy's cancer. There was a pause then he added, the guy died a couple of months later, but that was something else. Story 47, that if you're poor, then it's your fault for not having a better job, by a classmate that obviously was middle upper class and never had a taste of the real job market. Story 48, I know more about your vagina than you do from a 50-something-year-old man in my own living room. To demonstrate his knowledge, he described the different kinds of strap-ons. Story 49, my sister was seeing a guy who told me, with absolute conviction, that severe drug and alcohol addiction can be dealt with by just going to the gym. Luckily, she dumped him the week after. I'm a community social worker, and I did not want that guy as an in-law. Story 51, batteries don't make electricity. Years ago at a store I worked in, business was very slow, so the manager, a young woman that worked there, and I decided to play 20 questions. She went first. I asked if the thing used electricity, and she said no, we did not guess the object. Turns out it was a pager. I tried to explain to her that pagers used electricity, but she was adamant that they used battery power, and B0 battery power was not electricity. We never played 20 questions again. A year or so later I was in training in another store, and got into a discussion about gun control with a male coworker. I said we should use logic, and he responded that because people were illogical, you could not use logic to find the truth about issues like gun control. Story 51, my sister was so sure tomorrow was spelled tomorrow she made our dad come into the room to prove me wrong. He told us to stop bothering him over dumb, and I'm pretty sure she still thinks she was right. Story 52, right after I pointed out that the moon was super bright for it being in the middle of the day, he told me you can't see the moon during the day and that it was just a reflection. Story 53, the Earth is only 6,000 years old. Bonus points for them saying this to a USGS agent. While standing at the edge of a volcanic caldera that we know erupted 1,000 years before that date, because the local tribes have oral traditions about the eruption of Mount Mazama that created what is now called Crater Lake in Oregon, occurred about 7,000 years ago, with the local Klamath tribes attributing it to a battle between the gods. Story 54, humans aren't animals. They don't run around in the wild, and white people aren't of European descent. They're just white Europeans are of European descent. Story 55, I was 8 years old for the new millennium and was so excited to stay up for New Year's. My mom told me no, because I can stay up for the next new millennium. Story 56, the Earth was flat. A friend of my uncle that he works with, he was a pretty chill dude, and he said it almost in passing to the point I felt like I almost did a genuine double take. I didn't want to make an issue of it, family party, but definitely lower my expectations for the guy. Story 57, make America great again. First, your country is not named America. Second, the U.S. was never great. It's always been about greed, racism, misogyny, and downright cruelty. If you want to be great, get rid of these things instead of celebrating them. Story 58, overheard at Town Fair Tire. You know, where Martha's Vineyard gets all its water, from New Hampshire. Can you believe that, from a pipe that runs under the ocean? Look it up. Story 59, my high school chemistry teacher, this was 30 years ago, made a comment that air gets denser as you go higher. I, like an idiot, corrected her and said, I think you mean it gets less dense. She doubled down. I presented a number of supporting facts. That bags of chips and other groceries are ballooned out when you buy them in the mountains. That planes can only fly so high. That helium balloons float because helium is less dense. She retorted that all these happen because air gets denser. I finally asked if air gets so dense that there's just a brick wall before you get to space. You're just being difficult, and moved on. That's when I realized it was easier to just keep my mouth shut. Story 60, I can cure COVID without injecting you with poison. It's really easy and cheap too. I can also set you up to sell these little bottles of all natural oils, and you can make money. What if I told you that you could also set people up to sell under you? So you make a piece of everything they sell. My bats hit crazy stepmother. Story 61 heard a grown adult try to explain to a biochemistry student that hiccups are caused by your breathing and your heartbeat being out of sync. The biochem student did everything they could not to laugh in his face and walk it back a bit. But nope, yes it is, was dude's entire argument back. Story 62 circumcision is practiced for health benefits of men and women alike. This was said by some student on a last day of a sociology class I had in college. Needless to say, guy got pot roasted by the other classmates. I distinctly remember his defeated smirk he kept afterwards all the way to the end of class when he was walking out that classroom door. Story 63, one of my worst personality traits, is not being able to let it go when someone is too confidently incorrect. Twice in my life, it's gotten to a place where I just had to walk away when they wouldn't accept facts. 1, shrimp isn't a significant source of fat, i.e., is a lean protein. 2, pleather patent leather. Not plastic leather, incidentally. These debates were with two of my least favorite people I've ever known. Story 64, that touching a live electrical wire attached inside a space heater with exposed copper wouldn't electrocute them because it was already going to a source and wouldn't be directed to the human body. Story 65, my father recently explaining that meteors are the cause of all disease on Earth. When I paused and asked for him to clarify that, he said that the Black Death came from a meteor impact. When I tried to lightly explain that there was literally no evidence for that, he lost his on me for wanting hard evidence about everything, and I need to have more faith. He said a newspaper from the 1500s said a whole village saw the meteor, and that was that. I, for some reason, try to illustrate that mass acceptance of something in a newspaper that I don't think existed wasn't exactly evidence of anything, as we can barely get news accurately reported right now. I tried to explain how an entire region in America burned and hunted women for being witches that was most defiantly in a newspaper, complete with made-up jobs to hunt said witches. I was then accused of being a moron because witches have nothing to do with meteors and the Black Death. I hung up and haven't spoken to him in about a month, par for the course on most conversations. Mind you, I'm a poor medic turned nursing student studying diseases, and he likes to remind me he makes 6 figures managing construction, and that is the measure of intelligence. Oh look, this whiskey just appeared in my hand. Story 66, rats can get through pipes and stuff because they don't have a spine. I had to stop myself from saying anything because I realized this person was too stupid to have listened to me. Rats are mammals, and therefore are vertebrates. It is basically a prerequisite to being a warm-blooded animal. Story 67. The 2020 election was rigged. The 2024 election was fair. Ukraine was the aggressor. The measles vaccine causes autism. Biden kept astronauts in space as prisoners. I'm tired, boss. Story 68. I have lectured on all 9 continents of the world. Said by a highly educated, well-respected man who was in TH Department Chair of Engineering at a large university. Story 69. My was banned ex-husband was absolutely sure that beluga caviar came from beluga whales. I had to explain to him that whales are mammals and that they don't lay eggs or have roe. He was so insistive he was correct. Story 70. A 30-year-old woman told me this. Generation Z has no idea how hard it was for millennials growing up. We had dial-up internet. They grew up with DSL. I didn't say a word, but I stopped coming to the bar she tended. Everything she said had the word boomer or gin whatever in it. Story 71. When I was in high school, me and some friends were talking about religions. One of them asked me if I was an atheist. Before I could answer, another friend replied, of course he isn't. He is not a Nazi. Story 72. A trivial one, but I worked with a really quite clever guy a few years back. He got seconded to a different role for 6 months and asked me to update and send out his monthly report while he was away. I got all his instructions, and it was basically number crunching in Excel, so all good. Only his instructions were really convoluted. It felt like it was manipulating the data, but for no obvious reason. But I stuck to his way and sent out each month. When he came back, I asked him about the instructions. He said it was to ensure that the percentages were correct, because if you just took XY 100, the result might end up as more than 100, and you can't have more than 100. I laughed and said, sure you can. And he shot me down and very deliberately, very slowly explained that no, you can't, you just can't. That was an argument I chose not to have. So wrapped up the conversation and let him be. Odd hill to die on. Story 73. Had a VP of the not small company I work for TWLL me that the COVID vaccine was not a vaccine, but a shot, because it didn't provide 100 effective. Unfortunately, I guffawed in his face and started Googling vaccine efficacy and reporting the results. I will never climb the corporate ladder. Story 74. A couple of years ago, I heard a college student confidently tell his friends that it was inevitable that Kurt Cobain would kill himself because in the early 90s, everybody was on heroin. I was in college in the early 90s, and I'm 100% sure I never did heroin. Story 75, the flu isn't contagious. Yet we just go through all that effort of making a new flu vaccine every year. Just because we like wasting money, it being contagious is one of the reasons why it's such a problem. Story 76, of course. Everybody knows you can't transplant a liver really. So what does my wife do all day because she says she's a liver transplant surgeon? Story 77, can I read a post without having to read people's personal political opinions? Geez, Monty teach high school. Do you want alphabetical, chronological, or on a rating scale? Story 78, that Burt Reynolds was Ryan Reynolds' dad. From a friendly acquaintance, she was so certain I dare not contradict her. She's still walking around confident about this, and that makes me chuckle from time to time. Story 79, I was passing by a group of 20-somethings in Whole Foods one day about 10 years ago. No, Leonardo da Vinci painted the Sixtine Chapel. It broke my brain so hard. I stopped, looked back at them, paused, and decided it wasn't worth it. How do I explain to the know-it-all at the table just how completely wrong on so many levels their comment was? Story 80, Idiot 1, what was Pearl Harbor again? Idiot 2, that's when the Japanese bombed Boston Harbor. This was on a student trip to Europe. We were on a bus on the way to Omaha Beach in Normandy. Story 81, in a conversation about climate change. An old man once said to me, of course, the polar ice caps are melting. They melt every spring and freeze up again in winter. Story 82, I will lower the price of groceries. I will end the war in Ukraine on day one. You're going to win so much you will get tired of winning. I'm a stable genius, fertilization president at Women's History Month event. Story 83, I had a teacher insist it could not snow if the ambient ground temperature was above 0. I was in grade 2. I asked her why shaved ice didn't melt into water immediately when removed from the freezer. She did not like me. She also pronounced the constellation Orion as Orion. I think I cited about that one. I was so frustrated. Story 84, working at Ross after the shutdown. WHY do you guys close? The lockdown, but Walmart remained open. Only essential stores remained open. Why would you guys close and Walmart remained open? You guys sell essential stuff, more essential stuff than Walmart. Walmart should have been closed. I looked over at my manager, and we both had the same exact face like this groan was the dumbest ever. No way. She thought groceries are less important than clothes you couldn't even wear anywhere. Story 85, riding the subway in South Korea. A U.S. military guy was sitting next to me with his Korean girlfriend. I started paying attention when he said, but why don't you just say no for no? Why make up a new word? Her response was Korean is a different language from English. He came back with okay, but you say ani. Just say no. There's already a word for no. All of Korean is different from English except for loan words, and a few coincidences it kept going like that. He seemed to truly believe that English was the default language, and Koreans came up with Korean to be difficult or something. Story 86, I work in finance accounting, and a co-worker I was kind of friend with outside work refused to contribute to our company match 401k. Basically, it's free money, but he was convinced it was bad because taxes. I have no idea what he meant, and just thought, holy dude, you're heading down a bad path when you retire. He also bragged about pull tabs and spending money in the casino.